Hi, welcome all to today's Lunch and Learn session. Today we'll be looking at data analytics and the power of data analytics. Everybody knows that ERP, CRM systems generate huge amount of data, but actually turning that data into meaningful and insightful information on which you can base your business decisions is often seen as a challenge for many businesses, and no matter what ERP or CRM systems that they are using. So today I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Simon, Business Development Manager of our Data Analytics team, and who will introduce you to some fantastic IP which has been developed by HSO to accelerate your ability to use data in a meaningful and insightful way. So welcome to Lunch and Learn session, Stephen.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it. So hello, everybody. My name's Stephen Simon. Been with HSO about 6 months at the moment. On the data and analytics side, but I've been working with data and analytics for various companies for about 24 years, for the likes of IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, and SAP. What I want to do today is, it's a massive subject area with lots of value in for all organizations, but I'm going to focus on one specific part, as Steve has mentioned there, and it's just, my machine works correctly. It's looking at something called HSO DnA Accelerator. Now, I know a lot of the HSO customers use things like D365 and other Microsoft applications. But what we're going to talk about today is how to accelerate the adoption of how to utilize the value of the data from these systems, but also put a framework in place which enables you to get value from other applications, but drive them to a standardized Microsoft model where you can really dig into it and build a platform. So I'll start off by just putting some market position and comments in. Then I'll talk about what is the value proposition for DnA Accelerator. I'll walk through a high-level architecture. There's not going to be detail in there. And then I'll just talk through about some of the ways in which HSO works with our customers to try and start that journey and what makes sense for our customers. So the first one I look at is, what is your data maturity? There's a growing complexity of data at any organization. There's demands for new business and services. So if we look at how we start to fracture this out into the different areas, we've got, what happened, why did it happen? What will happen, when, how can we make it happen? What we're starting to look at is, how do you build a basis and get a common data platform that says, this is how I'm understanding my world? How do you then turn around and say, this is how I'm going to structure my world? We hear things like master metadata management, etc. What that means is, am I getting a single version of the truth? Do I understand what that data is? And is it in a format which is usable across the business? Data quality. Example for that would be something like, when I put an address, do I put a postcode in? If I'm talking to someone in the US, I know that's a zip code. It's that ability to talk across it. But once you've got all those basic building blocks in place, how do you actually start to derive real value from it? How do you turn yourself into that data-driven enterprise? So this is a really busy slide, and I'm not going to talk through it all. I'm just going to give you some examples of how we move from that left to the right-hand side. So we look at the red side. It's, what are the key insights I'm looking for my business? How am I going to centralize things like data integration so I can get all my different systems talking to each other? How am I going to look at the orange? What is my data quality? That's when we start looking at those areas. Have I got solid data security where I know I'm confident if I link different systems, I can still adhere to rules like GDPR? Then you look at when we start to derive the real value, when you get to the blue layer, is how can I leverage things like artificial intelligence? What is my most valuable use case and how can I build upon that? And how can I start doing things like process mining? Realistically, when you've got all those basics in place and you've adopted some of the newer technologies, how do we then, sort of inject steroids into it? How do we start to think about monetizing the data? Maybe farming some of the easier stuff out as a managed service, but how can we really start looking at innovation? You see the middle bit in there, the standard Microsoft tools what I'm basically saying there is the same tool set covers that whole life cycle. And for the observant in the crowd, you will have noticed the green bit was missing from the middle, which was optimize your business. Because realistically, that isn't a tool thing and it's not a HSO thing. It's about your organization using these things, mature and adopting it, because there's an element of organizational change that will go through people's mindsets so they understand how to utilize the tools to derive that business value, additional business value and innovative business value you see on the right hand side. So what are some of the challenges we see in I mean, these apply to Microsoft applications. They apply to any applications in anyone's environment. Some of them are a little bit specific, so forgive me, but we're short on time. So you could be locked into an expensive infrastructure, could be on premise when you could move to cloud, could be just a spaghetti infrastructure, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. Oh, sorry. You could have difficulty to retrieve your data. Many people have different layers, abstraction layers, taking data out, putting it in different places. That can make it difficult to find out what the actual core data was, which means, you know, how do you get to the truth? The data leakage. Transactions can be lost in the system. If you've got multiple integration points, you can lose things. Read-write speeds can be slow. It depending on what technologies you're using. So look at it, complicated, all leads to a complicated platform. And many people have them, which can be a management overhead as well as actually costly to just physically own and manage. There's a lot of focus on siloed developments. Different departments want to own their own data, want to do their own thing, want to live in their own universe, and it's how, you know, have the challenges that brings along it, not just to support, manage, but also when you want to change something in the environment, what does that actually mean? And then if you look at extraction methods, I put OData here as an example, but what I'm talking about really is point-to-point integration and the challenges that comes. It actually can be very quick and simple, but also when you start to work in a complex environment, it can be the opposite, essentially. Again, I said I'd use a couple of Microsoft examples because obviously most of the HSO's customers are Microsoft based. The Dataverse as well. So there can be challenges on the Dataverse about running rules checks and actually how much you're paying for the environments as well. And could that be done in a cheaper fashion or more cost effective manner? And then we've got lots of people who are running old SQL systems, old AX systems, 2009, 2012. Some people are running them in parallel, which has a license cost. And is there a way in which you could avoid the license cost? Is there a way in which you could take older systems generally, not just Microsoft, anything, and then move them into cold storage if they're not transactional anymore, keep them as OLAP, just report off them essentially? There's some of the challenges, and what we say with DnA Explorer is actually we look to take all of this myriad of different systems and accelerate you past them to get some real business value. So the key things I wanted to talk, the solution I'm going to talk about today, it sets up in days and not weeks to months. So days to a couple of weeks, not weeks to months to months and months and months. If anyone's ever set up a data warehouse before, they know they generally take between 6 and 18 months plus. It scales as you grow. We're going to be talking about moving into the cloud. And so it scales as fast as you need to scale as a business. It also decelerates if you need as a business as well. Everything we're going to talk about is all going to be based on Microsoft's reference architecture. And the key thing about that is nothing I'm going to talk today is going to tie you into any proprietary software or solutions from HSO. Everything is about, we've got the experience of doing these projects before. We've pre-built chunks of code which get you up and running. They're not going to do 100%, but they're going to get you somewhere between 70 and 90%. That's the accelerator part. Because we stick very closely to the Microsoft architectures, maintaining extensibility is all quite easy. Again, if you have other partners, they'll recognize everything we do because it's all based on standard Microsoft technologies. And because we accelerate, it's all about business value. So the time to value from when the business asks for something to when they're able to get something, it's going to be much faster. Therefore, a lot of what we talk about is going to be getting the business it faster, giving the business the ability to do it themselves. And again, like I say, everything we're going to talk about today is going to be cloud-based solutions. Therefore, it's all pay as you go. So let me just talk a little bit. I'm not going to talk in detail about architecture, but I'm going to give you the very high level to say this is what people generally have. They've got source data on one side, and they've got how you're going to consume it. Lots of people use Excel. Excel's never going to go away, but lots of people are starting to see the adoption of Power BI to get more visualization, more powerful visualization approach for more dashboards and that type of thing. It's easier to see KPIs, etc. I mean, you can build these things in Excel, and like I say, Excel won't go away, but the adoption of visualizations can be very powerful. But what do your environments look like? It's not really just a link from Power BI to D365 or other sources. You know, people have got the entities, people are writing Visual Basic code, people are then extracting with Excel. We've got SharePoint, ODS is operational data store. People are writing code with Python from other systems, putting it in, mixing it in. What we find is there's lots of different ways people are talking in the environment. There's lots of different ways to get the right answer. And it's actually, is it the right answer? I would question at that point. So what do? We follow the Microsoft Modern Data Platform. What does that mean? The Modern Data Platform is Microsoft's standard approach to how to manage data. So there's nothing, everything you see from us, everything we'll focus on is going to follow these. I'm not going to read each one of them out, but I'm going to give you the high level and tell you an area to focus on. You've got your source data. What is the application? What is the database? You've got your ingest data, where you're going to take that and put it somewhere else. Essentially, you're taking multiple different ways of how to talk, of systems which talk in different languages. You're translating it into one language, which you're then going to store in its raw format. When it stores in its raw format, it means you've got the lowest common denominator. That gives you a single source of the truth. And that is very important. Then you've got to be able to model it, which gives you essentially a lens on how to look at your raw data, which you can then consume at the end, which gives you that visualization, whether it be PowerPoint, whether it be a competitive solution, Tableau, anything, you can still follow the same model. And that's an important thing to understand. But then that lens you're looking at your raw data gives you the single version of the truth. So yes, you can have finance may want a different version of the raw data than HR will want, than other departments will want. And that's really important to the store in the middle. The raw data in the data lake stores the lowest common denominator. What does that mean? I'll draw up a standard architecture, what you'd use. So you've got your Microsoft D365, you've got your data feed coming out of it. You could have a SQL system, or you could have AX or something like that. I'm saying, let's assume you would archive it. You could have another system. You could have SAP in your environment, e-business suite, another database, Postgres, anything. What do? We put that all into the middle, and we put it into the data lake. All feeds in, translated on the ingest into standard formats, so we understand in the middle, that is your data lake, and it stores everything. You are then able to do that in interrogation of the data lake via Microsoft Synapse. So you can make a data warehouse without a problem, which is a series of abstractions looking at the data lake. The data lake never changes though. You can make an operational data store. Finance are a famous department for doing this. HR do it a lot, but finance will tend to say, we want our own data. We want to be in control of our reports. We might need to change it, but bam, bam, bam. But they generally usually get what they want. But so that is very usual to build an operational data store separate. You can model the data in any way you want. Again, all using standard Microsoft technologies. Now you'll see the consume layer has changed quite significantly here, because yes, you can use Power BI. Yes, you can still use Excel, but I've introduced the three new areas: self-service BI, machine learning, and AI. And the reason I put them as new, because when you've got that spaghetti mix, you can't actually do much of that because it's too difficult, and you will not get back to that single. You won't be calling it from the single version of the truth. And that's really important. So if you want to understand everything in your system with machine learning or AI, it's nigh on impossible without a massive, overly complicated infrastructure. Is self-service BI, you need that structures so you can set up your system so business analysts can go in and not have to worry about when is the data, where is the data coming from. He can just go into logical formats and actually select what he needs to see on the report. And that's really, really powerful working with the business. No more throwing it over the wall. And that's all got Microsoft Synapse pipes, so they all talk to each other effectively in a timely manner. You've seen governance pop up on the bottom left. Governance is absolutely crucial. So we're talking down to minute detail on what you're able to see, and that is reflected through the ingest through to the store. Now, why that is important is your system access will be reflected right up to storage. So when it's stored in its raw format, it will still have all the security protocols which say someone in HR in the UK can't see HR in France's details. Someone in HR in hiring people in the UK doesn't see the salaries of the CEO. Just all that down to row level security, you would call it, but also make sure it adhere to things like GDPR. Yeah, which is obviously a good thing for everybody. And then at the bottom, everything we do is based on the orchestration and DevOps from Microsoft, and it's fully documented as well. So everything that you needs to be put in that area. Sort of jumped into what I was going to go into next. This is the DnA Accelerator. This is what it does. So you can see we've got a framework of sub-accelerators essentially. What that means is, we've been doing Microsoft projects for 30 plus years. We've been working with customers for the last few years on the data lake, and we've actually done so many projects. We saw there was consistency with, like I say, 70 to 90% of what customers were doing in each single project. So we just packaged it up. It's not a product. It's just something we use to implement the solution really quickly, or the Microsoft Data Lake really quickly. So we go through it. We've got D365, AX, SQL out the box. We're building other ones. So we've done SAP, ECC6, Microsoft e-Business Suite, Data Core, and we're building up a catalog of others on that other data ingest accelerators. Everything with the governance tied into it, everything on the orchestration layer, but we get it to the data lake fast with the storage. We get it to the modeling fast. And then we've got 4 standard approaches. And I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about how we deploy this next, because it's really important when we look at that modeling level. So here, bottom left-hand side, this is a key chart. You look at the volume of data, low to high. You see the complexity of data as well. And that is, increase in complexity, increase in volume. Customers we've found is a very cheap and fast option to go in with serverless SQL. So that will take you into the Azure environment from D365. We've generally done it with customers where we've done it with a small to medium-sized UK retailer, and we've done that in about a couple of weeks. We've got other people who
Hi, Stephen. Seem to have a problem with your sound.
Sorry, how long's that been off for?
About 30 seconds.
Okay. So basically, we've got people who've started off, we've got a UK manufacturer started off with serverless SQL. Because it's cheap and it's fast, we can get you up and running in a week or two generally with raw data. And I'll explain why that differs to the modeling side later. But we've also got on the dedicated SQL, when you want that increase in volume, we work with retailers who said, say, once a week, we get a spike in requests from people who want to understand what we sold last week. And so that it can be slow and slow the system down. So for that time period, we put in dedicated SQL for them so they can do it at the only particular time. So you're not having to commit to this significant infrastructure. But if we look, and then we've got people who've got move. You move to the complexity on the bottom axis, and we've got people like Mustard, who's a manufacturer in Europe. They were extracting data from a lot of different systems. So what they had to do is they needed a scalable platform. So yes, they had to go with high volumes, but it wasn't massive amounts of volumes, but they needed to consolidate lots of different systems into a single report so they could look across things like finance, supply chain, sales, demand, and start building and doing things like demand forecasting. So then, but what if you've got a mixture of high volume and high complexity? You look at the massive parallel processing, basically a large data warehouse. So we've got, I think it's the oldest customer we've got in the DnA framework, a company called Bossard, who work in distribution out of the Netherlands. So they're in multi-countries, but they started working with us, I think, just under 2 years ago. We basically created DnA for those guys, but they went through they utilized all of the 4 flavors, because the key thing is on the right-hand side, you see the mix and match. So you can mix and match in between all of these. You don't have to commit to a giant data warehouse if you have certain bursts of activity. So you have the capability inherent in the platform. This is not something which is only true to DnA. DnA just gets you up and running on these capabilities from Microsoft faster. And the green circle in the middle on the left, you'll see everything on all of the platforms based on Microsoft DevOps, Microsoft Governance, the orchestration tooling between them all. So hopefully that's clear. I've put this in. Don't really want anyone to read it. It was just to give you an example and just to illustrate, you know, we work with a UPG, an engineering company. This is just one of the charts we pulled out. That what I'm trying to say is the 4 options you saw on the other page, we've got right down to multiple versions of Visio and diagrams. So we can go through and you give us different options. And when we talk with you, we've got a kit bag where we can pull it out and say, would it look like this? We can modify, or we can give you different options, which we've already done with other people. That's an important point to remember. It's the only reason I'm showing you that. So what are the benefits? So we think if you put in use DnA Accelerator to go into the modern data platform. So what is it? You can lower costs. Data's all stored in the data lake. So instead of having this spaghetti mess, what we saw before, and the management overhead, which is inherent in that, you can move to more logical platforms. You have the flexibility of identifying inside of Azure whether your data is going to be hot data, whether it's going to be high transactional data, whether it's going to be cold storage, etc. Flexibility is there, so you can map your business to the processing power and utilization. What you've got, you don't need to manage all these different systems. If I use D365 as an example, you've got to take out the entities, and it's whether the entity is talking to the D365, whether you're seeing the correct data on the front. With Data Lake, you're absolutely assured that the information you have to do a batch upload once, but then it does a trickle feed update of changes only. So once you've done your initial update, you then know you are near real time. I'm not going to say real time but it's near real time updates on the data. It can be fractional depending on how you set the system up and how much information you want passing between. But what that means is you don't need to worry about, is this information correct? That leads you to have the building blocks to build the models, which enable you to do things like self-service BI and AI. You know the information's there. You know it's there in a timely manner as well. You get that continuous updates. Like I say, the trickle feed updates means you're constantly updating the system on any changes, which is important, and that means file removals, etc. What that means is, one of the net results of that is you increase the accuracy of your reporting. You know what's in the system. You know it's in a timely manner. Nobody's challenging you on the data because you're all stored in that. The data stored in the middle, which is the data lake, which in its most raw format. So you have the information to take that lens. And what would I say? Flexibility deployment, I've talked about. You can deploy it from down to the low transactional. You can do it up to the very high, very complex. So it covers the whole spectrum. And when I say it's a seamless deployment, I mean everything's done out from our side. We do everything out of DevOps. It's all documented. So anything you do, we can move between those different layers dependent upon your business requirement. And put the point at the end, archive to SQL. archived AX. This again, something we can do in a matter of weeks. Some people have been paying for application user licenses when they were actually using other systems, whether it be D365 or anything else. We're talking here about saying this data is not going to be moved. No more transactions are going to be on it. We put it in cold storage into the data lake. You know, now you have all the benefits of how you were going to look at that storage as part of the data lake via the lens layer, the modeling layer. So here's the three things. It's important to know, like we say, the Accelerator is a standard repeatable solution based on best practice architecture. So we've got customers using it such as Godiva. I think everybody, particularly after Valentine's Day, knows about those guys, sell lots of chocolate. They were integrating lots of systems from lots of different sources, and they needed to measure key metrics and weren't really able to do it. So we brought them all together using this and using it and putting it on the standard platforms with DevOps, and they're able to do it. Increase the automation. Automation is absolutely crucial. The more automation you do and the better you get on it as a system, less mistakes, but it means the faster the data can be processed through the system, the more you can move to things which focus on innovation, like AI, like self-service and that type of thing. We've got CIP, a professional services organization. They wanted to look at actually data. When I say other sources, they were looking at data out of an SAP ECC6 system. So we work with them to use exactly the same process. You know, the modern data platform used exactly the same process. We took it all out, we used Synapse, and we let them look at it in Power BI. So we give them that consume layer, we give them the modeling layer, we took out and used an operational data store. So we didn't need to build a full data lake for them because they had other things. So we can give partial solutions if it fits the business requirements. And the last one I'll give you, facilitate modernization. Everything we do puts you on the latest Microsoft platform, which means you're ready to grow with Microsoft. We've got Rubix, is a multinational from the UK based on industrial supplies. They wanted to look at all the finance, F&O, finance and operations data from 365. So we needed to work with them to streamline it. So we modernized the system, we upgraded it, and they've got cost savings from the platform, but they can just view what's happening in D365 in a much more user-friendly manner. So that's, I would say, sorry, I'll go back one. So that's basically the solution. That's basically the value. Like I say, it's repeatable, something we've done. We've got about, overall, there's about 15 either engagements which are done or actually being deployed at this point in time, and the number grows by the month. So the last thing I would say is, how do we engage? However we engage follows these key steps, and we can do it from having a conversation that just says, it just makes sense, you're using D365, you should be using data lake, we can do it faster than anyone. Let's put it in, let's start getting value. The projects get a little bit larger if your modeling layer starts to get really complex. If your ingest layer, where you've done lots of bespoke code, or you're using third-party systems which are complex, that can take a bit of time. Other than that, if it's standard stuff, we can do really quickly. So we have to go in and understand the current state of your technology, is what it says. So we understand what you're able to then do with what you're trying to do, but then we have to understand what you're trying to do as well. So we'd like to go through these stages, but this can happen in a meeting if it's a conversation and the answer's obvious. We can look at how to do a strategy assessment with you. We've done data maturity. I talked about data maturity at the start, but we can look at how you can understand how mature you are and how ready your systems are to actually meet some of the data challenges in the future. So that's where we like to do. Like I say, we can do short engagements, we can do longer. One of the customers we've done, Barents, is we've done a data maturity assessment and then a data roadmap. They do life sciences ingredients and stuff like that. They had lacked insight into disparate systems. They had complex environment, like I've mentioned at the start. We went in and did the assessment. We told them where the problems were. We told them what the challenges they were going to face and how they were going to need to overcome it. And we work with them. So now they've got a global reporting system, essentially, where they've got a centralized view of all their operations. in their organization. And that is me. So hopefully I've got my manager, Andy Baker, in the room with me, and my colleague who runs the visualization team, Liam Burford. Happy to take any questions if anyone's got any questions.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Very useful overview of the DnA Accelerator and how we can enable our customers to achieve more with the data that they have and in a rapid time frame.